Is that Clem?
Yeah, hi. Is that Jason?
It is. Firstly, of course, it's helpful to talk about the Lust for Life tour. I think the one thing that really stands out for me was just the amazing reception that you guys had. You had lots of media attention. It went down so well. And crucially, it just looked like great fun and great music.
Yeah, it was really, really fun. And it was great to work with the people that I was working with on that. I mean, of course, Glnn came on at the last minute. It was a bit crazy because originally it was supposed to be Tony Sales, who was, along with his brother Hunt Sales, were the rhythm section on both the Idiot album and Lust for Life. And for one reason or another, as time got closer, Tony wasn't able to commit to traveling. And so we had to cancel our engagement in Japan, which was a bit of a disappointment. I always enjoy going to Japan. Last time I was there, I was with a band called the Empty Hearts, which a band I was involved in with a few people, Elliot Easton from the Cars being one of them. And we put 2 albums out a while back. And then some people in the band lost interest during the pandemic. It was very disappointing for me, once again, to not be able to carry on with the Empty Hearts. But anyway, at the last minute, we were able to get Glnn Matlock to come in. And so we kind of changed the whole kind of idea of the band in some ways. Glnn just had a new album coming out, so we were able to do a few of his songs. And then, we did some Pistol songs and just kind of got changed around a bit. And Katie Puttrick in particular was really amazing. She really rose to the occasion. She was almost became like a female Iggy. And also, the lyrics took on a less misogynist character, and they became more like the beat poetries, which they sort of really are in a way. And so Katie was amazing. And then Lewis and Florence were both amazing guitar player and keyboard player. And Kevin Armstrong, of course. I was familiar with his work, and Kevin was great as the MD. And yeah, the reception was pretty amazing. I think once Glnn joined, it became a little bit more coherent in what we were trying to do. And the rehearsals were really, really enjoyable. And a lot of the gigs just harkened back to the good old days, especially there's that towards the end, there's that club in Hastings, a pub. They have a gig upstairs. That place was so jam-packed. It was really reminiscent of being like at some place like CBGB or Dingwalls or something back in the day. And the enthusiasm for the band and for the music was fantastic. So we're doing it again, as you know, back in March. We're going to change some of the things up a little bit, but the whole band will be intact, and really looking forward to it.
When Tony was originally involved with this project, I think you first did Success as a single, which was originally from Lust for Life. And one of the things as well is that I don't know if people really know, is that you've got so many connections with Iggy. Obviously playing with Iggy on his album Zombie Birdhouse, but actually even before that, was it possibly around the Lust for Life era, you toured with Iggy with Blondie, didn't you?
Right. Well, the first national tour in the United States that we did with Blondie was in support of Iggy Pop when they were promoting, touring the Idiot album. And he was doing a selection of songs from Lust for Life, but that album had not been released as of yet. Right. And of course, famously on that tour, David Bowie was the keyboard player. So that's really what our relationship with David and Iggy began back then. And, with Blondie, we had played at the Club Max's Kansas City on the weekend, 2 sold out shows. And we got into, after the second show, about 4:00 in the morning, we got into a caravan. I always say the same thing. I have no idea who was driving. There was one bed that we basically all kind of crashed out in or slept on the floor. And this caravan we traveled to Montreal for the first gig. We arrived at the venue early, and we just went into the dressing room. We were just all kind of, shagged out from driving all night. And then the door opened, and David and Iggy walked in and introduced themselves. And that was the beginning of the tour. And it really showed them as really gentlemen and really they were very gracious to us on the tour, and they're very helpful. And I remember David would watch our sound checks quite a bit. And of course, I would watch their sound checks. And it was amazing. They would always, especially with David, he'd always be rearranging or sticking in new bits or background vocals on the songs. So the arrangements were growing as the tour was going on. And that's when I first met Tony Sales and Hunt Sales as well. And then I had a band with Tony right at the end, after Blondie stopped. I had a band called Checkered Past. We did one record on EMI America, and that band included Steve Jones from the Pistols as well. So there's a lot of connections between all the people involved in the whole. And of course, Kevin Armstrong was Bowie's MD at Live Aid, and also played guitar on the Blah 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 album, Iggy album. And Glenn wrote some songs with Iggy and played on the Soldier album, and also toured with Iggy quite a bit, I believe, at some point.
And it was you and Chris Stein who worked with Iggy for his Zombie Birdhouse album,
Right,
typified
right.
by
Chris
the
produced it. Yeah,
Villages.
yeah. Chris produced it, and prior to that recording of that album, I had been on tour with Iggy, and unfortunately, I was hoping that the touring band would have made that album, Zombie Birdhouse, but because of, I think, budgetary things, I think Iggy Pop was a little bit down on his luck about that time, and so he kind of just wanted to make a very minimal record and use some of the advance, I think, for living expenses and stuff. Because I toured with Iggy, with Carlos Alomar on guitar from David Bowie's band, and a guy called Rob Dupre, who I knew from the New York scene. He was in a band called the Mumps, and Gary Valentine, who was my high school mate who began Blondie with me. We had three guitarists and a guy called Mike Page, who played with Sylvain from the New York Dolls on bass. And we did a 6-week tour promoting, ostensibly continuing the promotion of the party album that Iggy had made, the Rock and Roll Party album. And we opened for the Rolling Stones for 2 nights in a giant, massive Pontiac Silverdome with no sound check. And it was Iggy, Santana, and the Rolling Stones, like 70,000 people indoors. So that was pretty interesting experience, to say the least. But yeah, there's always been a connection with Iggy. And of course, I bought those Stooges records when I was a kid. I mean, I think famously the Ramones always would say that the 4 of them were the only other 3 people that they knew that liked the Stooges were that wound up being the rest of the Ramones. And I kind of had that same kind of little rat pack of friends who were into Bowie and T-Rex and the Stooges and all, when most people, especially in the States, were into, I don't know what, the Grateful Dead and, things like that, more like, hard rock and all that. And I was always into the more artistic, experimental type of rock and roll, that Bowie was doing, or people like that. And of course, I'm very influenced by the whole British music scene in general. Yeah. And, it all began with the so-called British invasion of the mid-60s when the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone my generation cites that as being the turning point of wanting to be in a band, to start a group. And then with the Rolling Stones coming along, kind of like broadened the spectrum of how you can be in a group. And, so then it just kind of carried on through, the Yardbirds, the Who, the Small Faces, all those bands, very influential. And so that kind of continued into my, interest in people like Bowie and T-Rex and Slade, bands like that as well. Cockney Rebel was a big favorite of mine. I famously saw them play at the Bottom Line in New York, very small club. It was a really, really great show.
One final link with this tour is obviously the rhythm section that you've got with Glnn Matlock, and obviously right. You're playing now with Glenn in Blondie, and the footage of Glastonbury playing all the great Blondie hits like Atomic. It just feels like you're all locked in, and the band is as vital as ever. Yeah,
I mean, it's Blondie. It's almost like a super Blondie. We've had some changes. Chris Stein is very active on the latest album that we've done that's yet to be released. Our longtime bass player, Lee Fox, he kind of had some issues where he wasn't really able to travel. And we were just about to do this arena tour last March 2022 of the UK. So literally about a week before, I rang up Glnn and asked him if he was available to do it, which he was. And he's continued to work with us since. And he has a song on the new Blondie album that's yet to be released, as I mentioned. And Glnn and I had worked together on a couple of different projects as well. We had one group called Slinky Vagabond that featured Earl Slick on guitar. And then we had another group called the International Swingers with a guy called Gary Twin as the lead singer, who had some success in Australia with a band called Supernaut. And he was invited to do a tour of Australia. So James Stevenson, the guitarist, the UK guitarist, and Glnn and I were all friends with Gary. So we went on this tour of Australia with Gary, and then we continued the band. And we did release an album that's out there, International Swingers. But Glnn and I have a long history together. Also, at the height of Blondie, I had this first idea of having a so-called, for lack of a better word, supergroup. I was trying to put a band together with Glnn and Eric Faulkner from the Bay City Rollers and Paul Weller. Never really came to fruition, but we've had a few drinks and talked about it back in the day, but it never happened. But I thought at the time, the juxtaposition of having a Bay City Roller and a Sex Pistol in the same band was pretty interesting. And it would have been some great, they were all great songwriters. So that would have been an interesting band.
Yeah, Blondie's early years, it was through the New York club scene that you guys coalesced, was it, with Blondie?
Yeah, well, there was a place called Club 82 East 4th Street, which was a sort of a gay disco, really, more or less. And disco music was the predominant music that was be played at the club. But one night a week, they would have rock and roll. And the stage was set up behind the bar, similar to like if you went to like a strip club or something. Like the band would be set up behind a stage would be set up behind the bar. And so bands like the New York Dolls, Wayne County and the Backstreet Boys, a band called Teenage Lust, the band called the Neon Boys, which was the predecessor to the band Television, would play at this club. And I had a band at the time called Sweet Revenge, and it was a kind of a glam rock band. And we played there, and Chris Stein and Debbie Harry had a band called the Stilettos, and they also played there. But the main thing was everyone kind of hung out there on I think it was on the Tuesday or Wednesday night was the rock and roll night. You'd see people like Lou Reed and David Bowie at the club once in a while, and along with people like Joey Ramone, who was known as Jeff Starship at the time. He had a band called Sniper, and people like Lenny Kaye. And it was right around the corner from CBGB, so it was kind of funny how it's almost like everyone kind of changed their image a bit and went around the corner and started making music at CBGB. But Club 82 was definitely integral to the beginnings of the whole New York scene, kind of the tail end of the New York Dolls, glam rock, and into the sort of more bohemian underground scene that happened at CBGB. Yeah, that's kind of how it all began.
Out in the Streets is a great Blondie track. Who was into the Shangri-Las and the girl groups in the band, or was it all of you were fond of that sound?
Well, we were all fond of that sound, and that was one of the common denominators that brought us together as far as being musically compatible, Chris, Debbie, and I. We loved the Ronettes, we loved the Shangri-Las, we loved the Velvet Underground, and the New York bands but the girl group sound, the whole Brill Building, the whole Motown, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, things like that. All of us loved that music, which was very unfashionable at the time, basically. And of course, the New York Dolls were into bands like the Ronettes and the Shangri-Las, so that influence kind of carried over in that way as well. But when I first met up with Chris and Debbie for a little bit of a chat, we commiserated on our liking of artists like the Shangri-Las, for instance. And that was one of the songs that was in the early Blondie repertoire. And then we actually re-recorded it on the album that we did when we got back together called No Exit. We did another version of it. But our original demo included Out in the Streets by the Shangri-Las and an early version of What Turned Into Heart of Glass, and a couple other tracks that never really were professionally recorded. I mean, they're out there now. They've been in box sets and things like that. But the song Platinum Blonde, which was kind of like Debbie's calling card, was never really officially released, or really officially recorded, other than in a demo in a basement in Queens back in, I think, early 74 or something like that, or late 74. But I mean, yeah, that one of the early muses for Blondie was the whole girl group sound. And I think when you hear a song on our first album, like In the Flesh, we even have Ellie Greenwich singing backup on it, who co-wrote, Leader of the Pack and Out in the Streets and songs like that.
Do you think a bit of that girl group influence came into Ex Offender, for example?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of a homage to the whole Phil Spector sound in a lot of ways. And it's funny enough how that song came out right around the same time as Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. There's a lot of similarities between those two songs. I think, Springsteen was reaching for the sound of a Phil Spector wall of sound at the time as well. And, there's the guitar riff in Ex Offender that's reminiscent of the guitar riff in Born to Run. And we had no idea that each of us were doing that at the time. It just kind of coincided literally almost exactly at the same time. I think maybe Born to Run the album came out a little earlier than the Blondie album, but right around that same time. But that's kind of the sound in New York, a lot of it, the early Brill Building sound. And of course, Spector moved to California, but, it all kind of started in New York, and we were all exposed to that. Another song that's very New York is the song Denise, which was done by a band called Randy and the Rainbows, which was what they call in the States a doo-wop group, a bunch of guys standing on a corner and vocally harmonizing. And, we went on to record that as Denis, and it became a big hit for us in the UK. So we're very influenced by the sound in New York City. We still are to this day, along with many. I mean, we carried on with, with the influence in hip hop and all that as well later on.
It's interesting you mentioned a song like Denis, and there's obviously the Tide is High, but you had the knack of the songs that were covers. People weren't aware that they were covers and the original material, and you couldn't really tell the difference. You seem to have a real knack of finding material and making it your own. Yeah,
well, it was Debbie's idea to do Denise, for sure. I recall that. It was Chris's idea to do Tide is High. I think we all, the song Hanging on the Telephone, which is by a band called The Nerves, a guy called Jeffrey Lee Pierce, who went on to be the founder of a band called the Gun Club, was a big Blondie fan, actually became our president of our fan club for some time, which some people may find that hard to believe when you think of Jeffrey Lee Pierce in his incarnation as the lead singer of the Gun Club. And he sent us a compilation tape when we were on tour in Japan, just to have something to listen to. And one of the songs included was Hanging on the Telephone. So we all thought, wow, that's a really cool song, and decided to cover that as well. But yeah, we do have a knack for cover songs. I would like to make it sounds almost cliche, but I wouldn't mind making a covers album, a complete covers album. We used to do a lot of different songs. We used to do a song called Big Man in Town by the Four Seasons. We did Heat Wave very early on, and quite a few other songs. I mean, we've covered Jet Boy by the New York Dolls. We covered Pet Cemetery by the Ramones. You Can't Put Your Arms Around a Memory by Johnny Thunders. Sometimes I think I had this idea to do a punk rock or a sort of whatever you want to call it, new wave or New York band. We also used to do a song by Television called Venus de Milo. I was thinking we could have an album called Safety Pinups, like Bowie's pinups, safety pinups, But I wouldn't mind doing a full covers album. I'd love to do a complete straight ahead disco, like organic 70s disco album. But we never really have a particular theme when we go into record with Blondie. It all just kind of comes about quite naturally and organically. People come up with ideas and we just interpret them which way we think that the song should be going, whether it be me coming up with a beat or someone come up with a guitar riff. But the raw material is just there, and we take it and it becomes like Blondie's material. So we
And
never
you
go in with an idea. We're going to make an album like this.
And
Right.
you mentioned Disco. Heart of Glass obviously is a key track from Blondie that has that feel. But what was it like playing with a drum machine on that? Was that challenging or just something that came natural to you? You weren't defensive. You know, this is a drum machine. We shouldn't have them. Seemed to be open.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, this is before digital recording, so it was an analog way of doing things. So basically, what I did was there was the Roland drum machine, the same drum machine that's on Roxy Music Dance Away and famously on Phil Collins in the Air Tonight. It was that particular Roland drum machine that had just come out that everyone was using, but it wouldn't. There was no way you could sync that up with a synthesizer or arpeggiated synthesizer. So you'd have to do it piecemeal. So essentially we'd have to do it bar by bar. And what we did first off was I kind of made the bass drum the click track. So I played along with the synthesizer and just played the quarter notes on the bass drum and built the track up from there. So I wasn't inhibited at all about experimenting with drum machines. I mean, we've carried on that tradition more so as we go on. And live, some of the songs are programmed where I do play to a click and to some programming, and other songs are live. It's about 60-40 split of the Blondie live show. So whatever works for the song. I've always kind of been open-minded that way. I was kind of not really particularly fond of Heart of Glass when we first recorded it, as far as doing it live, but it's gone on to be a absolute classic song, and people seem to never get tired of hearing it. It's kind of like Kraftwerk meets Donna Summer, really.
Would you say that the Blondie album Eat to the Beat had a bit more of a live feel than, say, Parallel Lines?
Well, Parallel Lines was recorded live as well without any kind of programming and all, but
okay.
There was a kind of a reverse psychology used by our producer, Mike Chapman, because it's been said many times, as he was such a taskmaster and a very arduous procedure to record Parallel Lines. I never really felt that way. I really respected Mike for his past history of working with people like the Sweet, Suzi Quatro, and writing songs like Tiger Feet, like bubblegum glam rock songs. And but Mike was a pretty pretty well minded on the idea that he wanted to make Parallel Lines the classic album that it became, and really kind of worked us pretty hard on getting the basic tracks correctly. And so when it came time to do Eat to the Beat, he almost used kind of a reverse psychology on us and kind of just let us kind of go for it. Prime example of that being Dreaming, which is probably the first take. I never expected that to be the final basic drum track, and Mike, everyone thought it was just great. I was just kind of having a jam on the song, kind of running through it, as we were beginning to run it down in the studio. So the Eat to the Beat is our most rock album, my rock and roll album, I would say. Something like the song Eat to the Beat, with the harmonica, and pretty raucous, and accidents never happen. I think maybe that's on Parallel Lines. I'm getting confused now. Of course, and then there's like Union City Blue on Eat to the Beat. There's big drums, Power Station. Yeah. It's our most rock and roll album, I would say. But then you have something like Atomic on there, which kind of carries on the tradition of Heart of Glass in a way.
It's amazing that there were singles that were #1 in the UK. I think Sunday Girl being an example, that weren't even released in the States. And you seem to have a different career at times in the UK in terms of some of the material that was released.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. I've kind of pointed that out many times. Songs like, it kind of starts with Denis, which was a big hit. And then Presence There also was a big hit off the Plastic Letters album. Then carried on with the release of Sunday Girl, Hanging on the Telephone, Picture This. Were all big hits in the UK, but as you said, they weren't even released in the States. I think the US marketing company, the marketing people in the States didn't really know what to make of the album at first. The first single was the cover of the Buddy Holly, I'm Gonna Love You Too song in the States. I don't think it was in the UK. It is really interesting that more sort of like Blondie pop songs And then in America, in the United States, we've had 4 number ones, but they were all of a different sort of genre, each one, starting with Heart of Glass, and then, carrying on with Call Me, which was kind of a one-off, which we did with Giorgio Moroder producing, and then Tide is High and Rapture, all kind of different songs. And all of them number one in the States. But as you mentioned, things like Picture This or Sunday Girl were never a hit or released as singles in America. Yeah. It is like 2 separate careers in a way. And, we were always, as I mentioned, we were always very influenced by the British music scene. And to have success in that way has always been very satisfying for all of us. And, kind of continues. I mean, the tour we did last year with Glnn, the arena tour, was great. It was all sold out and really fantastic.
And then coming back in the late 90s, and again, a UK number one with Maria. I mean, there's not many groups that would be able to do that. That must have been extra special.
Yeah, but I think it had a lot to do with our clothes, our suits. I'm only kidding. What we did, we really laid the groundwork for that No Exit album. We did a tour prior to the release of the album around Christmas time of 98, I believe. And then Maria was released in early 99, and it kind of was set up pretty well to be accepted by the British public. But yeah, it was pretty phenomenal at the time to have a so-called comeback release go right to number one. And yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it was just the beginning of a whole new era for Blondie that continues to this day, especially in the UK. But we are finding we're getting a lot more recognition in the States. Funny enough, maybe it all kind of began when we were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which I really almost never expected to have happen. And we were eligible for quite some time. And then we were finally inducted. It was a bit of a acrimonious situation for us, but was really glad to be inducted. And just recently, Billboard magazine has named Debbie number 7 greatest lead singer of all time. They've done, for some reason, they've done this list of 50 greatest lead singers, not artists. For instance, Bowie or people like that are not included, but people like Roger Daltrey or Grace Slick or obviously Mick Jagger. And so Debbie's in the top 10. And I always said that she was as equally as amazing as someone like a Mick Jagger or Jim Morrison or David Bowie. I mean, she's a woman. So for me, she's the female equivalent of all of those people, just as brilliantly talented as them. She really reminds me of David Bowie a lot, Debbie. Her whole approach to making music and delegating other musicians and her wordsmith, whatever it is, her brilliant lyrics,
That continues though, doesn't it? I mean, even I think the last Blondie album release was Pollinator, and songs like Long Time, they're just as vital as the songs that you were doing in the late 70s and early 80s.
Yeah, we're particularly happy with Long Time. I mean, that Pollinator album was kind of a one-off because most of the songs were from outside writers. And there's a band called Blood Orange, Dev Hines, and he wrote that song Long Time. And that's another thing with Debbie and Chris. They're always kind of aware of artists that I may not be aware of. I was not aware of Dev Hines particularly. And then it comes to pass that he is quite well known and quite credible. And, we're happy to get that song from him. And yeah, Long Time, we did a good job on that song. That whole Pollinator album is great. I think we had more of an objectivity working on it because a lot of the songs were from outside writers. I mean, our keyboard player, Matt Katz-Bowen, wrote a couple of songs on there. I think Debbie and Chris maybe wrote 1 or 2 on there. And then the rest were from people like Johnny Marr and Dave Steck from TV on the Radio wrote the song Fun. And we had a good time making that record.
And you mentioned the Empty Hearts earlier, and on Remember Days Like These, that featured Ringo Starr. How did that happen?
Well, actually, Wally Palmer from a band called the Romantics, who's the lead singer in the Empty Hearts, did several tours with Ringo and his all-star band. And I cut the track with the band, and then we decided we could maybe get Ringo to add his drums. And so I wound up playing tambourine on it. And on the first Empty Hearts album, we were lucky enough to work with Ian McLaughlin, Ian McLaughlin as well, who
Ian McLaughlin of Small Faces.
Right. Ian McLaughlin, right. The Small Faces and the Faces. I had done a record with a guy called BP Fallon. And we got Ian on that record. We did it in Austin, Texas, where Ian was living at the time. And so when we did the Empty Hearts album, I rang up Ian, and he just coincidentally had happened to be in upstate New York, right when we were in the studio. So he was able to come in and spend the day with us. So we had two amazing people on, one on each of the albums, Ian on the first Empty Hearts album and Ringo on the second one. Yeah, I was happy to play a tambourine along with Ringo on drums on that. It's amazing.
You've got so many projects, exciting projects on the go. What's exciting you coming up over the next 6 months, a year?
Well, I've written a rock opera with two of my friends, Andy and Debbie Harris, who have the band called Bootleg Blondie. And they are a tremendously talented couple. And the reason they had Bootleg Blondie is because they were trying to do their original music for some time and not really making much headway with that. And then they formed a sort of a pub rock band doing covers. And whenever they would do a Blondie song, they'd get a great reaction. So they decided to have this Blondie tribute band, which I actually toured with. And while I was touring with them, it was before the pandemic, I suggested that maybe we start writing some original material together. And I suggested that we perhaps use London as our muse. So we've written a rock opera called The Big Smoke. Just getting ready to put a single out digitally on the Blow Up label. I don't know if you're familiar with the club Blow Up or the label Blow Up. So we're going to put out a little teaser, an excerpt from the rock opera, The Big Smoke, and that's going to be coming out soon. And also, I'd been working on my memoir. It's almost a cliche. Everybody's got a book, right? But I actually have a legitimate book deal. So the memoir hopefully will be out next Christmas. But I've just been meeting with UK publishers now because we secured the deal in the US first. Surprisingly enough, because I was always thinking that, if anyone would be interested, would be the British public. So that's happening. And several other things. I'm actually playing at the 100 Club in October with a side project I have called the Split Squad. We've played the 100 Club several times. We're there, I think, around October 25th. And then I did a record during lockdown with a band called the Tearaways. That's on Dirty Water Records. It's available. And we're going to be playing at the 100 Club in November. So I'm going to be back in the UK in October and November. And then
back again.
Coming up right away is we're doing some US festivals with Blondie in September. We just did a show the other day in Vancouver, British Columbia, with Bryan Adams and Belinda Carlisle and Inhaler. The band Inhaler.
Yeah.
Bono's son's band, who are very good. And we have some more Blondie shows in September. And looking forward to the release of the Blondie album next year. And but The Big Smoke, the rock opera, that's coming. That'll be out some point. We've recorded 28 songs so far. And a guy called Pat Collier used to be in the Vibrators, has a great studio in Lewisham. So we've been working there. I just came back from the UK about maybe 2 weeks ago. So there's a lot going on for next year. I've got to complete the memoir. It's mostly completed, but I'm real excited about that. There'll be some stories to be told, some real insight into the whole Blondie experience, and of course with all the other people I've worked with over the years. So now that the deal's in place, I was kind of my muse during lockdown to keep myself occupied. Then I kind of put it aside. But then when there seemed to be real interest in it, so now I'm really kind of very excited about completing it and having it released.
Sounds great. It'd be lovely to talk to you again.
Things. Okay, Jason, thank you very much. Great to chat
See you
with you
later.
Okay, see you. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.